The Stanford Prison Experiment, you've probably heard about it, maybe in a psychology class, a documentary, or even a movie. But what really happened? Why does it still matter? And what can we learn from it? Let's break it down, talk about its impacts on policies and pop culture, and explore the criticisms that have come to light over the years. By the end, you can decide for yourself what to make of it all. The year was 1971. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo and his team at Stanford University wanted to study the psychological effects of perceived power. Specifically, they wanted to see how people would behave when placed in a simulated prison environment. Would good people do bad things if given authority, or would they resist the temptation to abuse power? To find out, Zimbardo recruited 24 male college students, all of whom were deemed psychologically healthy, and randomly assigned them to play the roles of either prisoners or guards. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but things spiraled out of control so quickly that it was shut down after just 6 days. The setup was intense. The prison was in the basement of Stanford Psychology building, and the guards were given uniform, sunglasses to prevent eye contact with the prisoners, and batons. The prisoners, on the other hand, were stripped of their individuality, given numbers instead of names, forced to wear smocks, and even made to wear chains on their ankles. The goal was to create a sense of dehumanization. Almost immediately, the guards began to abuse their power. They subjected the prisoners to humiliation, sleep deprivation, and psychological torture. The prisoners, in turn, became submissive and emotionally broken. Some even had to be removed from the experiment early because of extreme distress. Zimbardo himself got so caught up in his role as the prison superintendent that he initially didn't realize how unethical the experiment had become. The Stanford Prison Experiment didn't just stay in the lab, it rippled out into the real world, influencing everything from prison reform to Hollywood. The experiment became a rallying cry for critics of the prison system. It seemed to prove that abusive behavior wasn't just the result of bad apples, but could emerge from the power dynamics of the system itself. This idea influenced debate about prison conditions, guard training, and the need for oversight. For example, after the Abu Ghraib scandal in 2004, where US soldiers abused Iraqi prisoners, Zimbardo himself testified as an expert witness, arguing that the situation was a real-life example of the dynamics he'd observed in his prison. Another place where the influence of the Stanford Prison Experiment is seen is pop culture and entertainment. The experiment has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and even a 2015 movie starring Billy Crudup as Zimbardo and Ezra Miller as one of the prisoners. It's also inspired fictional stories like The Hunger Games and Black Mirror, which explore themes of power, control, and dehumanization. The experiment's dramatic narrative, that is, ordinary people turning into tyrants, makes for compelling storytelling. Lastly, the Stanford Prison Experiment became a cornerstone of social psychology, illustrating how situational factors can override individual morality. It also sparks important conversations about the ethics of psychological research. How far is too far when studying human behavior? Should experiments that cause harm, even if they yield valuable insight, be allowed? For decades, the Stanford Prison Experiment was held up as a groundbreaking study, but in recent years, it's come under serious scrutiny. Some critics argue that the participants were simply acting the way they thought they were supposed to. This is called demand characteristics. The guards, for example, may have been playing up their abusive behavior because they believed that's what Zimbardo wanted to see. In other words, the experiment must have been less about natural human behavior and more about people following a script. Some critics also think that the experiment lacked scientific rigor because it wasn't exactly a model of scientific precision. The sample size was small, the participants weren't diverse, and there was no control group. Plus, Zimbardo's dual role as both researcher and prison superintendent created major conflicts of interest. Critics argue that his involvement may have influenced the result. Also, some researchers have questioned whether the experiment really proved what it claimed to. For example, not all the guards were abusive, some were actually kind to the prisoners, and while the experiment is often cited as evidence that anyone can become a tyrant, critics point out that real-life situations are far more complex. And let's not sugarcoat it, the experiment was deeply unethical. Participants were subjected to psychological harm, and the lack of oversight is shocking by today's standard. In fact, the backlash against the Stanford Prison Experiment helped lead to stricter ethical guidelines for psychological research. So, where does that leave us? Was the Stanford Prison Experiment a groundbreaking revolution about human nature, or was it a flawed, unethical study that's been overhyped? Honestly, it's probably a bit of both. On one hand, the experiment highlighted how easily power can corrupt and how situational factor can shape behavior. These are important insights that still resonate today, whether we're talking about prison systems, workplaces, or even social media dynamics. On the other hand, the experiment's flaws and ethical issues can't be ignored. It's a reminder that science can be wrong when not done right, and even famous studies need to be scrutinized. At the end of the day, the Stanford Prison Experiment is a fascinating and controversial piece of history. It forces us to ask tough questions about power, morality, and the system we live in. But it's also a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority, both in research and in real life. So, what do you think? Does the experiment reveal something fundamental about human nature, or is it too flawed to take seriously? How should we balance the pursuit of knowledge with ethical responsibility? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And remember, whether you're a student, a psychology enthusiast, or just someone curious about human nature, the most important thing is to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.